The medicine killed George Washington faster than the disease he had, and his last words left no one indifferent. But let's go back to the beginning. One day in December, Washington returned home after horseback riding in a snowstorm. He arrived soaked, with a fever and his throat slowly closing up. He probably had epiglottitis, which is when that little flap at the back of the tongue becomes inflamed. Today, that would be treated with antibiotics. But in the year 1799, the solution was much worse. The doctors bled him out, literally. They cut his arm so the disease would leave with the blood. Just that day, they drained more than 2 liters from him. That is equivalent to almost 6 cans of energy drink, but without energy, without sugar, and without sense. With a weakened body, he could barely breathe, and yet he tried to reassure the others with his last words, "Everything is fine." And if you thought that was dramatic, what comes next is the greatest coincidence in the history of the United States. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the second and third presidents, died on the same day. They started as friends and revolutionary companions. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and Adams helped defend it. But in the 1800 elections, they became political rivals. After a decade without speaking, Adams and Jefferson reconnected as friends through correspondence and became best friends again. However, on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, something eerie happened. Jefferson fell ill with diarrhea, pneumonia, and a kidney infection. The night before he died, he asked, "Is it the 4th?" referring to the United States Independence Day. They told him not yet. So he held on one more day, and his last words were, "No, doctor, nothing more." Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away in Massachusetts, John Adams, a sick 90-year-old man, suffered from heart failure. Completely unaware that his friend Jefferson had died hours before, Adams uttered his famous last words, "Thomas Jefferson survives." It's pretty crazy that these two, who spent their lives as enemies and friends, ended up dying on the same day, the United States' birthday. Something similar happened with the 4th president, James Madison, who almost didn't die on July 4th either. After struggling with congestive heart failure, the father of the United States Constitution was on his deathbed. The doctors did try desperately to keep him alive until the 4th of July. But when his niece offered him more stimulants, Madison said, "Nothing but a change of mind, dear. I always speak better lying down." Which basically meant he was ready to go. He died on June 28, 1836. James Monroe, the 5th president, became the 3rd to die on Independence Day. He had heart problems that worsened after contracting tuberculosis, and his last words were about how much he missed his old friend James Madison. "I regret leaving this world without seeing him again." John Quincy Adams. While most presidents die in their beds, some die on the floor of Congress. Like the 6th president, John Quincy Adams, who after being president did not retire to play golf. Instead, he returned to Congress as a representative, and while casting a vote against, suffered a massive stroke. He clung to his desk and collapsed on the floor of the House of Representatives. After being carried out, John Quincy Adams said, "This is the end of the earth. I am happy." However, some presidents had a more peaceful end, like Andrew Jackson, one of the wildest presidents in United States history. He was a tough guy who fought in duels. He survived the first presidential assassination attempt and hit his attacker with a cane. But despite all that, he didn't die as one might imagine. He suffered from tuberculosis, had heart problems, and suffered from dropsy, a condition in which the body retains too much fluid. And on his deathbed, surrounded by his family, this tough guy became sentimental. His last words were, "Do not cry, my children. Be good, and we will all meet in heaven." William Henry Harrison holds the record for the shortest term, all because of a simple mistake. During his inauguration, William Henry Harrison gave a very long 2-hour speech in freezing rain without even wearing a coat. For over a century, it was believed that he died of pneumonia, but recent studies suggest that was not the cause, as he did not fall ill until 3 weeks after taking office. Experts believe he died of typhoid fever or septic shock due to contaminated water in the White House. That's really bad luck, because Harrison only lasted 31 days in office. Harrison's vice president, John Tyler, took office after his death. But this president did not have a particularly good relationship with the people. He was the only president whose death was not officially mourned by the country, because during the Civil War, John Tyler sided with the South. He was even elected to the Confederate Congress. But before he could take office, he began to feel dizzy. He died of a stroke. And his last words after someone asked him how he was feeling were, "Perhaps this is my best possible state." Then came James Polk, who died at just 53 years old. 3 months after leaving office, he was touring the southern part of the country when he contracted cholera, a horrible disease that causes explosive diarrhea. Despite the circumstances, he died like a romantic. His last words to his wife were, "I love you, Sarah, for all eternity. I love you." Zachary Taylor died from eating too many cherries and drinking too much milk. During a 4th of July celebration, under the scorching heat of Washington, Zachary Taylor desperately sought to cool down. So he ran into the White House, ate a bowl of raw cherries, and drank several glasses of milk. The problem was that, at that time, food safety practically did not exist. Taylor fell ill with gastroenteritis and died 3 days later. However, many believe that he was poisoned because Taylor was already acting provisionally when all this happened, just as the tensions that eventually led to the Civil War were increasing. But when forensic scientists analyzed his body in the 1990s, they found nothing suspicious, so it all points to it simply being some bad cherries. Before dying, Taylor said, "I am about to die. I expect the call soon. I have tried to faithfully fulfill my duties, and I have no regrets." James Buchanan. Many consider him one of the worst presidents because the Civil War was approaching and he did nothing to prevent it. Buchanan died of a severe respiratory infection, although some believe he was a victim of the mysterious outbreak of the National Hotel disease. But those are just rumors. He died proclaiming, "O Lord Almighty God, your will be done." And Abraham Lincoln. You know what they say. Weak men create hard times, and hard times create strong men. And that brings us to this figure, one of the greatest presidents in the history of the United States. Although the Southerner probably doesn't think the same, because while watching a play at Ford's Theater, Lincoln was shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth, and unfortunately, couldn't leave words of wisdom. Instead, his last words were a casual comment to reassure his wife in the theater box. He said, "She won't think anything of it." He was referring to what their friends might think about them holding hands in public. After the crazy assassination of Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson took over the presidency, and he wasn't exactly popular. Congress even tried to remove him through impeachment years later. Johnson died from 2 strokes while visiting his family in Tennessee. The second stroke left him paralyzed on one side. His last words were, "My right side is paralyzed. I don't need a doctor. I can overcome my own problems." President Ulysses S. Grant led the Union forces to victory in the Civil War. But after his presidency, everything fell apart. Grant lost all his savings in an investment scam. It turned out someone was running a Ponzi scheme, and to make matters worse, Grant was diagnosed with throat cancer, probably from smoking so many cigars, sometimes up to 20 a day. But before dying, Grant wanted to write his memoirs so that his family would not be bankrupt. So he sat down every day to write while cancer was eating away at his throat. And his last word was, "Water," a simple request for a glass of water because his throat was dry. A pretty crazy way to leave. But things got crazier with the 20th president, James Garfield. After only 100 days in office, he was walking through a train station when a mentally troubled man approached him from behind and shot him twice. The first bullet grazed his arm. The second lodged in his back. But Garfield did not die immediately because the bullet did not hit any vital organs. However, everything got worse when the doctors intervened. They explored his body with unsterilized instruments, and one of them even pierced his liver. So, although Garfield survived initially, he suffered enormous infections for the next 80 days until he died slowly. His last words were, "Sway me. Can't you stop the pain?" This poor man was basically a victim of medical malpractice. Garfield was succeeded by Chester Arthur, who eventually suffered from Bright's disease, a condition that involves kidney failure. He died of a stroke at 57 years old. No definitive final words were recorded, but some say he whispered that life is not worth it. Grover Cleveland was a man who lived life intensely. He was the 22nd president, and then also the 24th. He died of heart failure at 71 years old. And his last words were, "I tried with all my might to do the right thing." At least, he was not one of the 4 presidents who were assassinated, like William McKinley, who was at a public event in Buffalo when a man in line to greet him turned out to be Leon Czolgosz, a Polish-American anarchist. He was hiding a .32 caliber revolver under a handkerchief wrapped around his right hand. When it was his turn to greet the president, Leon shot McKinley twice in the abdomen. A bullet just grazed him, but another one lodged deep in his stomach. He was rushed to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find the bullet. His last words were addressed to his wife. "We will all go. May God's will be done, not ours." After this, the people of the United States were fed up with their presidents being assassinated. So the Secret Service was given the responsibility to protect the president permanently. And that is how Vice President Teddy Roosevelt came to power. This guy was one of the toughest presidents the United States has had. He served 2 full terms and wanted to run for a third. In 1912, he ran again as a candidate for a third party, the Bull Moose Party. And when he left his hotel to give a speech, he was shot in the chest. However, he did not die. In fact, he stood up and gave a speech that lasted 84 minutes with the bullet still lodged in his chest. Teddy lived for 6 more years. During that time, he led a dangerous expedition in the Amazon and almost died again, this time due to a leg infection, weight loss, and malaria. Many believe this weakened him permanently because at 60 years old, Teddy died in his sleep from a blood clot. His last words were, "Turn off the light, James." William Howard Taft, famous for being so fat that he got stuck in a bathtub. Standing 6 feet tall, Taft weighed over 300 pounds, which severely affected his heart. Although he managed to lose quite a bit of weight, the damage was already done. He died of heart failure at 72 years old. His last words were not recorded, so they are left to everyone's imagination. Woodrow Wilson never fully recovered from the stroke he suffered while in office. Sadly, he spent his last years partially paralyzed. His last words were, "I am completely broken, and when one no longer works, it's time to go." At least this man died after being president. Not like Warren Harding, who was facing corruption scandals while still in office. In an attempt to regain public trust, he went on a speaking tour across the country. But the situation was so stressful that he developed pneumonia, and while resting in bed, his wife read the newspaper aloud. Harding died of a heart attack. His last words were, "Keep reading." Franklin Roosevelt was elected president 4 times in a row, but by his 4th term, his health was ruined. He suffered from high blood pressure, heart disease, and, secretly, had polio, which left him paralyzed from the waist down. Oh, and on top of that, he had to deal with the Great Depression and a little conflict called World War II. Crazy. During his 4th term, Roosevelt suffered a massive stroke while posing for a portrait at his retreat in Georgia. His last words were, "I have a terrible pain in the back of my head." Harry Truman lived for several decades after leaving the presidency. At 88 years old, he was hospitalized due to pneumonia. His condition worsened as multiple organs failed, and he eventually fell into a coma. And because he was in a coma, no last words were recorded when he died. On the other hand, we do know exactly the last words of Dwight Eisenhower, and they were quite direct. After a long history of heart attacks and strokes, Eisenhower was hospitalized at the famous Walter Reed Hospital. Finally, he died of congestive heart failure. His last words were, "I want to go. God, take me." Sometimes presidents are ready to leave, while others are taken too soon, like President John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated while traveling in an open motorcade in Dallas. A sniper's bullet hit him in the head, killing him instantly. Now, we are not going to get into all the theories about who really killed him, but most people believe that the main responsible was Lee Harvey Oswald, who was in turn killed only 3 days later, making everything even more suspicious. Shortly before the assassination, Nellie Connolly, who was sitting in the middle row, said to Kennedy, "Mr. President, you cannot say that Dallas does not love you." And he responded with a smile. No, definitely not. Those were his last words, spoken seconds before he was shot. At just 46 years old, Kennedy was the youngest president assassinated in United States history. The man who took his place was Lyndon B. Johnson, who died 10 years later after suffering a massive heart attack on his ranch in Texas. When he felt it happening, he picked up the phone and said, "Send Mike immediately," referring to his Secret Service agent. But it was too late. Those were his last words just before he fell dead. Richard Nixon died in a similar way. Famous for the Watergate scandal and being forced to resign, he lived an extremely stressful life, but did not die until he was 82 years old. He suffered a massive stroke at his home in New Jersey. He shouted, "Help!" That was his last word as he was rushed to the hospital and went into a coma before passing away. Jimmy Carter seemed to live forever. In fact, he literally just died. Jimmy Carter lived to be 100 years old and died of natural causes on December 29, 2024. Although his last words were not publicly recorded, in his final weeks, he told his family he was ready to see Rosalind again, referring to his wife, who had passed away a month earlier. George Bush had Parkinson's disease in his last years, which left him in a wheelchair. Her last phone call was with her son, the other President Bush, in which she said, "I love you too." After that, she died at the age of 94. And that brings us to the present, where there are still 5 living presidents. And although it's the most dangerous job in the world, modern presidents live longer than ever. Thanks to the Secret Service and top-notch medical care, the life expectancy of presidents went from 70 years in the 18th and 19th centuries to 78 years in the 20th century. In fact, we currently have an elderly person in office, and he had to dodge some bullets to get there. But if you think that's impressive, I'll finish with some of the craziest facts about presidential deaths. 8 presidents died while in office. 4 were assassinated, and 4 died of natural causes. The youngest president died at 46 years old, and the longest lived died at 100. Remarkably, Adams and Jefferson died on the same day. Don't forget to support this kind of content by subscribing and watching this other very interesting video that you will love.